Hi, everyone. So my name is Randy Yang. I categorize myself as a medical imaging innovator. I'm also an assistant professor at Cedars-Sinai and CEO of Lucidity Medical. I'm not going to talk too much because I'm going to be speaking next. It's not a TV-grade video, as some of them that you have seen, but we know our target audiences. This is a plugin for MI systems, so this is a presentation that I have.
Hello, everyone. My name is Randy Yang. I'm the CEO of Lucidity Medical. Today, I'm going to introduce a technology that can enable a new generation of MRI coils and provide revolutionary speed and clarity for MR imaging. MRI is a fast-growing modality with fantastic soft tissue contrast. It has a market size of more than $8 billion and is growing faster and faster in the past 10 years. However, if you go to a hospital today, you may still need to wait for more than 6 months to get an MRI scan. And that is mainly because MRI is a relatively slow imaging modality, and its supply simply cannot keep up with the fast-growing demand from all different patients. A major reason of the limited speed of today's MRI is because of its magnetic field interference from objects with unmatched susceptibility near your body, such as metallic implant or even air in your body cavities. The field disturbance creates so-called susceptibility artifacts, as we're showing here in the images, and can affect 20 to 30% of all MR scans. This led to extra scan time with repeat acquisition or slow imaging parameters. At Lucidity, we developed a patented unified shim coil. It can correct the local field interference, provide high-quality images with revolutionary short scan time, and enable multifold amplification of scanner throughput, which lead to true value for healthcare providers and the patients in need. Taking brain imaging, for example, a standard brain MRI usually takes 10 to 15 minutes to acquire images with different contrasts. If we adopt a fast image acquisition called EPI acquisition, the same image set can be acquired within 1 minute, which is a 10-fold image acceleration. However, EPI images are notoriously sensitive to susceptibility artifact. We can see in the images that the artifact caused by the air in the nasal sinus is corrupting the image quality and compromises diagnosability. This makes EPI unsuitable for routine clinical use. But by adopting unique coil, we have the capability of eliminating susceptibility artifact and makes the patient in scan time 4 times shorter than the original standard protocol. This can be translated into a $1.6 million extra revenue per year and provide a more than 10-fold ROI for the unique coils. How do we do this? Similar to the popular active noise cancellation headphone, we first measure the shape of the disrupted magnetic field. And utilizing the high-order shimming capability of unique, we can generate an identical cancellation field to cancel out the interference. By combining these fields, we are able to eliminate the noise and generate high-quality images without artifacts. Because of the precise shimming capability, unique provide high successful rate without compromising patient comfort. Most importantly, the tailored field can enable fast imaging sequences and act as a great market differentiator for MRI vendors from their competitors. We see big market potential in the 3.5 billion MRI coil market with the popularity of high field scanners and rapidly rising prevalence of metallic implants. Today, we have developed a proof of concept multi-purpose coil for a clinical 3D MRI scanner. We have successfully integrated the coil into the system and performed scans in human subjects. Unique generates high-quality images with fast imaging sequences in different organs. Currently, we're raising funds to develop the first clinically viable brain coil. Our team is composed with experts in all aspects of the field of MRI. We have collectively 30 plus years experience in MRI product development with multiple software and hardware applications being deployed in more than 500 sites. We have close relationship with major vendors and is working with former president of ISMRM, which is the biggest MRI technical society in the world. We are also collaborating with clinicians and KOLs at top medical institutions to perform clinical studies and validate products with opinion leaders. At Lucidity Medical, we provide revolutionary solution to enable rapid and clear MR scans for all patients that we image. We provide solutions benefit all stakeholders and unleash the true potential of MRI scanners. Thank you for your attention. That is my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Great. Thank you, Randy.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Very impressive. I worked in the space many years ago in Israel. What is the strategy? It's going to be a device. It's going to be sitting beside the MRI equipment. Is it going to be a bolt-on?
Yes.
You've got a 7-year cycle in hospitals. They don't replace their equipment. So
Yes, it is. This is, if you've been in an MRI, you will see a surface receiving coil, right? So this is actually something that we integrated into the receiving coil. So it's a plugin. You can just buy that new receiving coil, you put it in, and it can act like what the regular receiving coil. And that's one of the biggest advantage that we have. We don't change the workflow. So it's like the standard coil, you put it in, and it adds on this noise cancellation capability.
thank you.
And for an owner of an MRI machine, what's the cost and sort of barriers to implementing your coil and replacing it?
Right. So the standard cost of a brand coil that is now sold by the MRI vendors is around $100,000. And for this, we foresee if we collaborate with the vendors, they will give maybe a 20 to 50% margin. So maybe 150,000, which is really marginal to the cost of the whole MRI scanner. But once you bought that, and as I'm saying, we're keeping the workflow, right? So everything will stay the same, but you put them in. And some software upgrade, hardware integration, and then that's done.
What is the kind of flexibility with different scanners from different manufacturers? Is there going to be an issue there? And is there any kind of hurdles from them changing their devices or, preventing or blocking you?
Yes, very good point. So this is really a business strategy that we're deploying. You can work with exclusive vendors that they can use this as a competitive advantage against others. But currently, we're staying mutual. So we don't have an exclusive partner yet, and we will work with the path that works the best.
And is there any changes in any of the scan types that could be done or any indications? Once you make this change, does it preclude any of the normal operations? Or is it something where it only sees a reduction regardless of the scan type?
That's a very good point. That's a very good question. So you actually will need a software upgrade. That meaning you will integrate that into certain scans that is most sensitive to the artifact that I mentioned. And many of those are already implemented, and you can choose them actually on the scanner. But in general practice, people don't use them because of the artifact. If you see them in 30% of the patients and you need to scan them, you don't use them at all because you want the throughput, you don't want to rescan anything. So you use the slower ones for everyone. But if you can increase that successful rate to 90%, then everyone will be using that.
We have 2 minutes left. Any questions from the audience? Maybe one or two?
I had one more. So your claim is that you would be increasing by 90% the accuracy?
Actually, from our current data and simulations, we see a successful rate, so-called successful rate, because we're improving the image quality to a diagnosable degree. And we see 90% of the data that will fulfill that criteria. and that is from the pre-acquired data from actually an NIH database.
Yes.
So we do simulation up on that.
Okay, so you're doing A/B. Thank you.
Just one last one on the competitive landscape here. There are a lot of like software only approaches to help, get similar kind of time reductions. How do you guys see yourself competing with something that requires an implementation and onboarding if they're coming to install post hoc or paying more, from the manufacturer directly?
Exactly, and the beauty of this is it's complementary. So you can do both at the same time, and we can't actually do this without them. So some of them, parallel imaging, compressed sensing, or deep learning, those are all part of the acceleration process, and we're making the successful rate, especially with this susceptibility sensitive sequences, to become higher and higher, so you can finally use them for clinical use.
I have a question. Would this work with cancer imaging? A lot of times when patients come off of chemo, they go for follow-up imaging every 6 months. Now, sometimes the follow-up imaging shows them as being clean when they're not really clean because the imaging hasn't missed a few cancer cells, and then they're surprised later on when it recurs when they could have maybe treated it much sooner.
Exactly. So thank you for bringing that up. We actually had an NIH grant before, just 2 years ago, and it's exactly on that. So this can enable a technique so-called MR spectroscopy much better. And MR spectroscopic imaging provides a huge benefit in the residuals of the cancers or the clearance after radiation.
I'm saying so that the imaging that you have, would it be 100% accurate so that you don't miss any cancer cells that might come back?
So a quick answer is that we have actually a collaborator that is working on GBM radiation therapy. They show that with MRSI, the spectroscopic imaging that I mentioned, you can prolong the life or the outcome, the quality of care by more than 6 months. So that is a significant improvement. I don't think anyone can claim 100% you can catch something in medical imaging, especially with the accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity, right? But we can see significant improvement, and that has been shown.
Great. Randy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is David Haggerty, and I'm the founder of Vine Medical. Today I want to talk to you about how we're reimagining airway management. You might be wondering, what about it needs a reimagining anyway? Well, here's the issue. What you see before you is a medical doctor in their residency attempting to intubate a patient with the state-of-the-art equipment, the GlideScope. Despite a decade of medical training to date, this provider is still struggling to not just intubate the patient, but to even visualize the proper anatomical features to place the tube. The ABCs of emergency medicine, airway, breathing, and circulation, in that order, demand a primary focus on securing the airway. While the situation is a training exercise in a totally safe environment, many circumstances that demand airway management are not, and every second of oxygen, or lack thereof, can spell the difference between life and limb. As the situation unfolds, more hands are required in an attempt to improve visibility, and as a consequence, provider resources are focused on this singular problem of gaining an airway. After more than a minute, multiple tools and techniques, multiple providers' attention, the tube is finally placed, and further care can finally commence. At Vine Medical, we believe we can do better. A lot better. We call this device the Origin ETT because it represents a new beginning in airway management. In mere seconds, our device deploys to the trachea with minimal provider involvement. Now for the first time, anyone, anywhere, anytime can gain an airway. Now let's take a second to discuss the problem in more depth. At a high level, airway devices have been constrained to a single paradigm for nearly a century: visualize and place. This methodology is workable for anesthesiologists, the airway experts, that only fail about 3% of the time. But as soon as you step out of the OR, success rates drop precipitously. ER doctors fail almost 20% of the time, and paramedics fail almost 40% of the time. In combat, military medics don't even intubate anymore. Such outcomes increase the risk of successive failures and adverse events. You're 7.5 times more likely to experience adverse events with greater than one intubation attempt. And as well, every failure attempt impacts successive attempts, with up to a 15% reduction compared to the first intubation attempt with the third intubation attempt. And in combat, failed airway management is actually the second leading cause of preventable death, behind only hemorrhage. And patients with failed intubations also stay in the hospital more than 1.5 times longer. This leads to an average cost per stay increase of the same amount, and ICU admission rate nearly doubles as a result of these failures. And the root cause of this is that nearly every endotracheal tube is placed via airway visualization. And this requires both extensive anatomical knowledge and some hand-eye coordination that takes years to master. And moreover, there are numerous factors that make visualization difficult even for these masters, such as obesity and normal anatomical variations. Now, we solve this challenge with a radical new approach. The Origin ETT is the first autonomous endotracheal tube. By exploiting both anatomical expertise and biomimetic design, we create a system that rivals anesthesiologists in any provider's hands. We leverage vine-inspired tip growth to autonomously navigate the upper airway, and our soft, self-deploying system requires mere minutes of training instead of years. By eliminating the skill floor for effective airway management, the Origin constitutes a paradigm shift in the field. We take seconds to deploy, and with a few pumps of air, we provide a definitive airway as good as any endotracheal tube on the market today. You connect your standard breathing circuit, and you're ready to ventilate. Now let's talk about the market and traction to date. The airway devices market is nearly $2 billion per year and growing at 6%, limited primarily by a lack of skilled professionals. 65% of this market comprises competing products, and a 30% capture of just the 500 largest hospitals throughout the U.S. corresponds to $135 million in annual revenue. Nearly all of this market is based in the developed world, and by reducing this skill floor, we believe this estimate is only the beginning. Considering the competitive landscape, we see that the Origin is in a class all its own. Traditional methods are highly effective, but extremely difficult to use. As a consequence, the market has developed something known as an LMA, which serves as a temporary solution until a sufficiently skilled practitioner can place an ETT. This device is significantly easier to use, but it's significantly less effective because it doesn't actually enter the trachea like an endotracheal tube does. But the Origin combines both of these features, facilitating state-of-the-art efficacy through unparalleled usability. Now, we've shown this device to emergency medicine doctors from the West Coast to the East Coast and to anesthesiologists from California to Canada. In both cases, the reception has been overwhelmingly positive, and the market appears ripe for disruption. We've assembled a team of technical and medical experts prepared to take this device to market, and to do so with the singular objective of putting the airway management expertise of the anesthesiologist in the hands of anyone, anywhere, anytime. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, judges, the floor is yours.
Congratulations, David. This is a paradigm shift. Where are you on the product development?
That's a great question. I'm excited to tell you that we're basically weeks away from a design freeze. We just got our first manufactured prototypes off the line. We're in the stage of transitioning from benchtop prototypes to manufactured prototypes under a quality management system with a contract manufacturer that's ISO 13485 certified. So, obviously between here and there's still quite a bit of work to do. Since it is a paradigm shifting sort of device, we expect that we're going to be falling in the de novo classification. So not just benchtop trials, but also, at least some level of clinical data is going to be required for approval. So we anticipate about a 2-year horizon to submitting our de novo application.
Do you foresee any patients and circumstances where your device wouldn't be effective where you would need to revert to the current state-of-the-art methods?
That's also a very good question. There's a lot of, let's start at a high level. In general, the normal human anatomy is, variable but predictable. There's a lot of pathologies that can occur in the trachea. You can get vocal cord disease. You can have, it's a very specific name, but essentially a mass that grows behind your trachea that when you're sedated collapses your trachea. A vast majority of those, I believe that our device can handle. I would be lying to you if I said that we could hit 100% of people 100% of the time. But the thing that's really unique about these systems is they can actually move through constrictions that are tighter than the diameter of the device with ease. There's no shear force. It's only normal and very limited by pressure. So really, the anatomies that we will not be able to traverse are those that have a basically completely sealed trachea, something like laryngospasm. I don't think that we're well suited for today, but I think that there are ways to circumvent these anatomical limitations. Well,
yeah. Thank you for the presentation. Excellent. Just kind of following up on that question, what does it look like for the anticipation from your benchside work when it fails for you guys? What will it look like? Will it be a new device? Will it be, how do you remove it if it doesn't insert into the right place? What is the feedback, because it's autonomous, for the user to know that it's been inserted correctly would be important issues?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple different features. First, if we look back at the device, which we can't go through slides at this point, but there's a window that describes the deployment state of the device, right? There's this clear window that you saw the internal endotracheal tube. So until that's fully extended, you're not deployed. There's a lot of different ways that anesthesiologists and medical providers check to confirm placement of an endotracheal tube today. The gold standard is end-tidal CO2, which is a readout on your ventilator. Basically, you look for concentration and waveform. And so this device, for confirmation, has those two different features. One, you make sure it's fully deployed. Two, you check your end-tidal CO2 and ensure that you're getting that return CO2 that you anticipate. For kind of the failure cases, you're very much correct that there needs to be some sort of training associated with these edge cases that I think we're still very much in the analysis and understanding of phase. So I think throughout the benchtop trial phase, these are things that we really need to characterize. We plan on getting in the cadaver lab in the next 2 months and testing this rigorously across height ranges as well. And it'll be an iterative process to understand exactly how we need to inform the providers to deal with such scenarios.
And maybe one more, because we haven't talked about it. So cost-wise, the dollar number, what are you looking at in terms of in comparison to? And
Great question. So kind of if you think about what the cheapest way to intubate somebody is today, you have a direct laryngoscope and you have a cheap endotracheal tube. Depending on volume, we're talking, $30 to intubate somebody. As I mentioned previously, the complication rate is pretty high, and part of the difficult airway algorithm is to utilize different tools to sustain ventilation, sustain saturation in that process. And so a large percentage of these intubations actually require multiple tools. We can quickly get into $150, $200 range if you use a video laryngoscope, a really expensive endotracheal tube, a bougie, right? Our device hopefully can eliminate all these needs for additional tools, and we come in at a cost-competitive $50 price point with about 60% gross margins.
I think we had a quick question from the audience. Dana?
Yeah, what about liability? So if you're saying that anyone, anywhere can use it, you know, expect the unexpected. Things come up that you didn't expect, and if you're not an MD, an anesthesiologist, and you don't have medical training, there's some liability there. Yeah, and also the risk of infection if you don't have medical training.
Yeah, so, you know, great question and extremely valid concern. The first step to this pathway is FDA approval for use by medical doctors, by experts. In the long trajectory of the evolution of this product, we hope to, our long-term vision is that this basically accompanies every AED, so that we can address both the A and the B with the C in emergency medicine. But these are definitely questions that we're going to need to figure out before we get, you know, before we get anywhere near that. Luckily, if we're in the regime of medical doctors, much of that is built into common practice as it is right now through, you know, malpractice RVUs, and that's built into the CPT code that covers emergency intubation. So,
I think we have time for one more question.
I noticed that I think it occluded the esophagus, right? So would you be able to use it like a nasogastric tube along with that?
I didn't catch that very well.
I noticed that the device occluded the esophagus.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Temporarily, yes. Good, very good question. So there's kind of two different components to this device. There's deployment, and then there's the static or stationary endotracheal tube. And those two items are separated. And once deployment is complete, that body collapses, completely deflates, and doesn't occlude the esophagus and allows for an orogastric tube placement, which is exactly right. That's a critical part of emergency airway management. Once you get the tube in, get an OG tube, make sure that aspirates are controlled for. So good point. Thank you.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for now, but thank you very much, David. Appreciate the presentation.
Appreciate it.